Little Rock, Arkansas, and the first phase of the trouble. The white population are determined to prevent colored students from going to the school their own children attend. Picketing the school, they clash with the police.
I have today issued an executive order directing the use of troops under federal authority to aid in the execution of federal law at Little Rock, Arkansas.
In the 1958 to 1959 academic year, Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus closed all public schools in Little Rock rather than desegregating the city. Other emboldened Southern leaders followed in his footsteps and swelled massive resistance throughout much of the South in the late 1950s. Carolyn Porter and Essie Knowles, two hardworking students from Little Rock, Arkansas. One, the future student council president and members of the choir, who became two of the bravest students to ever walk the halls of Housatonic Valley. During the 1958 to 1959 school year, they had to attend and graduate from Housatonic. But why didn't they graduate in their hometown? What was this switch like for two black women from the South in such a predominantly white community? One of the most influential moments in the history of American desegregation was the Little Rock Nine entering Central High School.
When people thought about desegregation, they didn't think about putting everybody together. They thought about taking a handful of Black students, generally those who are most academically successful, bringing them over into a white school and leaving everything else the same. Only a small number of Black students could apply to transfer to Central High. Nobody else in the city is going to be involved. So basically, this meant that the wealthy people didn't have to worry about it. So there were originally probably almost 100 students who wanted to transfer. But by the end of this process, there were only 17 that the superintendent was willing to accept. And those 17, their names got put on the front page of the newspaper. Their information got spread all around the community. Of course, their parents were intimidated. And so by the beginning of the school year of 1957, there were only 9 of them left. When the students got to school, they were pelted with rocks and bricks and eggs, and there were people screaming in their faces and trying to physically attack them. They got into school that first day. The mob got so loud and so dangerous and so violent outside that school officials, who were not welcoming to these students in any way, they were treated absolutely horribly by most of the administration and the teaching staff, in addition to most of the student body, had to hustle them out through an underground garage to get them away because they thought the mob was going to break into the school. But even when that wasn't happening, the day-to-day existence for those students was just the most horrible thing you can think of. I mean, they had acid thrown in their faces by other students. They had knives pulled on them in the hallway. Teachers acted like they weren't there or were explicitly racist to them, talked right in front of them about these invaders coming into our school and thinking they're as good as we are. I mean, imagine being a 16-year-old in this unbelievably hostile environment, and all you can hope is that the teacher will at least treat you with kindness. There were girls who were in the girls' locker room. They were held under scalding hot showers. It was the level of hostility and hate and resistance throughout the school year was just unbelievable. And for the most part, that was backed up by parents and it was backed up by local officials.
I spent all of my life in the Little Rock schools, from elementary first grade through to high school 11th grade. Of course, the 11th grade was completed, but the 12th grade was interrupted by the Little Rock crisis. We were in segregated school, but I didn't necessarily feel a disadvantage because our teachers were also African American, and they were very interested in having us perform well. So we sort of had an extra parent in the classroom cheering us on. It was a community, even though we came from all parts of the city. By the time we got to junior high school, we were all fed into the same junior high school.
What about you, sir? Do you think the colored students will show up?
If I got anything to do with it, they won't show up. Well, I think it's a breaking point of the school integration. I just don't feel that they have a right to go to school.
Well, we knew in general what was happening, but not on an adult level. You know, we were still sort of teenagers, 16, 15, 16.
Carolyn would quickly become more aware of the reality of desegregating the South.
I don't know if you've seen the iconic picture of one of the Little Rock Nine when she was attempting to come to school, and she was by herself, walking with a notebook with a jeering crowd behind her. Well, really what happened is she got separated from the group because her family didn't have a telephone, and they couldn't get in touch with her to say, don't go today. And so she did what she was supposed to do and was unfortunately out there all by herself.
When the National Guard arrived, tensions grew in the community.
We were all a little tense when the National Guard was there, called out by our Governor Orville Faubus, and we knew that there might be a confrontation. He actually did that to prevent the students from entering the building versus to escort them. There were rumors of people marauding the city in black neighborhoods and shooting things up, but that actually never manifested. However, my father did get his shotgun out and sit at the window just to protect my family if I have to. But it never happened. It was all bluster.
The decision to close schools as a response to violence was not unusual. It's not in the Constitution. We don't have to offer public education. If it has to be desegregated, we'll just set up private schools and, the Black students can fend for themselves. But Little Rock, Arkansas was following the line of other districts that had said, well, there's just too much violence. There's too much resistance. We can't operate an educational system like this. Those students either simply missed a year of education or their families had to try to scramble to find, independent placements. Like, did they have a relative somewhere else? Did they have a friend who they could send the student to live with? So in the Black community, by and large, it depended on what kind of resources and connections parents had outside of the community.
My mother had her master's, and that was 60 years ago. With little kids, and my father was the principal, but he back in those days, you could earn a living with working for the government, but you could not earn a living doing anything in education as a Black male. So he actually ended his career by working for the post office because that was what Black males had to do at that time.
Carolyn's parents' education and jobs gave her opportunities most did not have in the Jim Crow South. But without the ability to go to school, everyone needed to find an alternative education.
It's just everybody just having to leave, get up and leave. Everybody had to do that because no schools were open. No white schools, no Black schools, no public schools were open and at the high school level.
Most students were able to attend schools outside of Arkansas by staying with relatives during the shutdown. Others who had to stay in Little Rock watched educational programming on television or lost a year of schooling. However, Carolyn and Essie had an entirely different experience with the help of Daisy Bates, who had a connection in Lakeville, Connecticut.
And I can't say enough for Daisy Bates, who was a civil rights activist extraordinaire, and she was a newspaper owner and editor, and she was literally the mother hen for the Little Rock Nine, and she was the glue that held everything together in Little Rock. Well, there was a gentle, wonderful humanitarian who lived in Lakeville, Connecticut. Her name was Catherine Aller. She was very interested in what was happening in Little Rock. And actually, she lived on an estate in Lakeville at Lane's Inn. And she asked for 2 students to come live with her since our schools were closed by the governor. All of our schools, not just the African American schools, but white schools. Any public school was closed, so nobody could go to school. And she asked for 2 students to come, and I was one of those students. Well, of course it was different because we were living in basically a very special situation in Mrs. Aller's home, and she lived on an estate which we had never experienced before. So it was sort of mind-boggling to come down her lane and pass the guest house and then past the gardener's house and then come to the home on the lake, sprawled out actually perfectly on the lake with its own dock. We were able to sit outside and eat dinner at Lakeside. For us, it was unbelievable. It was almost like, do people really live like this?
Although Carolyn and Essie were accepted, that didn't make it any easier.
It's a little emotionally traumatic because you don't know what to expect, but it's sort of like an adventure. But the good thing was there were 2 of us, and we could support each other. We were friends to begin with. We lived in the same area of the community, and so it was really a win-win situation, even though we weren't all that sure of it. I remember on some occasions friends that had automobiles, and we would, I remember the highways in Connecticut, just going from one town to the other and just enjoying whatever was there. We didn't do much nightlife. We were always interested in making sure we got back home safely and had enough time to do our studying. There were a few people who reached out to us, and that's pretty much where we landed. But no one was really hostile, or everybody, we felt accepted. At least I'm speaking for myself, I felt accepted.
When asked about how she felt about leaving behind the 3 years she had spent at Horace Mann High School, Carolyn explained her plans to become student council president.
All of that and other things that were planning to happen, it couldn't. It was a disappointment in a way that we didn't get to have those experiences that we were so looking forward to. I can't say that one particular experience determined my life, but it was a good experience. But if I had not had that experience, I still would have persevered. That's just sort of the family situation and community I came from. But it was a good experience being at his battalion.